Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Constantin Morun emigrated from Romania to Canada with his parents in search of a better life, and he found it. He has a successful tech career with Microsoft, but more importantly, he has found himself on a journey of greater self-awareness and mastery, which he shares with his clients and through his podcast, Unleash Thyself. Constantin brings together technology and self-mastery in a way that changes lives. Please welcome him to Bump in the Road. Constantin, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Pat, thank you so much for having me on the show. Yes, my story. So my story starts in Eastern Europe. I was born in Romania during the communist era, and it was a time of scarcity and fear. And even though I was a young boy around that time, a lot of the influences of the environment and of those people that took care of me imparted on myself to some degree. And I didn't realize it until I grew up much older. Now, when I was around 17, my family made a choice to move to Canada to give my brother and I a better chance at a better life. So we moved across the continents and we established a life in Canada. I went and finished high school here and then went on to study the sciences. I went into engineering first and then mathematics and computer science. And I have a degree in that field. And most of my life I've spent between entrepreneurial adventures and the corporate world. And often the two were very closely related because I would always have a passion that turned into some sort of a side business of sorts. Now, I would say the biggest part of my journey really starts about 3 years ago when at the time I was working, and I still work at Microsoft, right, in a very competitive environment. I was in a different role than I am in today, but it was a role that was fairly high stress. And coming out of the pandemic, I was working 12-hour days most weekends because I was part of the team enabling our clients to essentially be able to work from home during the pandemic. And as some of your audience members may remember, during the time, most organizations were not ready to have people work from home. They didn't have the tools, they didn't have anything to allow them to work from home. So anyway, long story short, like most people, the pandemic time wasn't the best of times, but a lot of it came out from there for me. And in 2021, I was at a very low point in my life, despite having what most would call the American dream. A great career, a great family life, shiny toys, everything one would want. Yet on the inside, I was feeling empty, unfulfilled, not really happy outside of some material things and, of course, my relationships. So I always wonder, is there more to life? Like, this doesn't make sense. I did what everyone else told me to do. Go to school, get good jobs, get the shiny toys, and yet I'm not feeling it, right? And then that's essentially what started me on the journey I'm on today, and the reason I'm even sitting here in front of you right now, Pat, and having this beautiful conversation.
So talk a little bit about that journey.
Yes, thank you. So 2021 is when I started to ask questions, more serious questions about myself. But during that time, Canada was still fairly closed off. The borders were closed off. And I had started to do some research into how I can take myself outside of my comfort zone, but also truly understand myself better. And up to that point, a lot of what I was doing in life has been based on someone else's definition of success, someone else's definition of literally development, right? Like I would read books, I would have mentors, I would watch videos and listen to podcasts, and I would consume. And of course, I would implement some of that because I've been successful and a high performer all my life, but I didn't give myself enough time to sit with my own thoughts, understand who I am at a core level, work through all those emotions that I've buried deep down over the years, especially as a man growing up in Eastern Europe. I was taught not to show emotion, not to cry, not to do certain things like art or be artistic. So a lot of those things were suppressed, and I wasn't necessarily aware of how to actually deal with them. So towards the end, or I should say second half of 2021, I made a decision to take some time off for myself when the borders opened up in early 2022 and go on a journey of self-discovery. And I took 3 weeks and I went to Ecuador in South America, a place I've never been to before. And part of my trip was a 12-day retreat. And at this retreat, it was essentially a mental health retreat. It had a component of plant medicine, which are indigenous plant medicines from the Amazonian jungle that have been passed down through generation after generation for thousands of years. And these plant medicines were supposed to essentially allow you to see yourself for who you are, understand the universe a bit better, and see how life is supposed to be. Now, I went into this not knowing really what the experience will be like, because I've never done anything like it. I've never been one to even, get drunk or do any drugs. So I was like, you know what, I'll go in. I have an open mind. I'm skeptical, but I've tried a lot of things up to this point, therapy and medication, all the stuff wasn't working. So might as well try something that's more natural. And I love nature. So being 10,000 feet up in the mountains in the beautiful countryside of Ecuador, I mean, for me, that was magical to begin with. Right. So that's how my journey started. And of course, the 3-week journey was amazing. Like, it was one of the best things I've ever did for myself. And I came back with a lot of zest for life. And I was like, okay, I understand what I need to do. I have to do a lot of work on myself. There were some things that were opening up. But that good feeling lasted only for about a few weeks, because the reality sank in. The reality being that I now have to sit with my emotions, have to understand how to process everything that I've been suppressing all these years, and at the same time realizing that the world around me hasn't changed. I'm the only one that made some changes, and I still have a lot to go through. So in fact, coming back in May of 2022, it sent me on a very dark path, but also at the same time, an amazing path. It was kind of like, filled with highs and lows. I would have a good week and then I'll have a couple of bad weeks. And in that time, most of 2022 is when I actually had a couple of big breakthroughs, one of which being discovering what I would call my why, my mission, my purpose in life. And there was a few other things, but it was a huge catalyst. And it took me months to actually realize how to actually put it in practice. And at the end of 2022, when I was finally pulling myself out of this depressive state, in which, by the way, was my darkest time, suicidal thoughts crossed my mind multiple times, I said, you know what, I have to do something, pull myself up. I said, I now understand my purpose in this life. How do I bring more of it in my daily life? Because you see, when I did my inventory, I wasn't doing almost anything that was aligned with who I was at the heart level. Not in my professional life, not in my personal life, not anywhere. So I said, okay, so how can I bring the real Constantin out in my professional life at Microsoft, in my personal life, and everything in between? And that's kind of how the journey started for me in 2023.
What did you find was your why?
So my why, the way I see it now, it's been evolving slightly, but the way I see it right now, and with the people I get to work with to help them uncover their why, it's all about being in service to yourself and others. And it looks different for everyone. For me, my why, the way the sentence I use is to inspire, empower, guide, and support individuals on their life journey so they too can find joy, fulfillment, success, and abundance in this life and make the world a better place. And when I look at my why as that statement, I now get to ask a very important question. In every conversation I have, in every interaction I have with someone, am I able to inspire or empower or guide or support them? If I'm not doing one of those 4 things, then it's likely not aligned with my why, and it's not going to bring me joy and fulfillment. Now, does it mean that every action I do in life has to have one of those 4 elements? No, because you don't control your environment, but the majority of them can. And I can show up in such a way that just by shining my light, by being a positive person, I can just inspire someone to perhaps take a different action, or perhaps be less rude, or perhaps have a better day, right? So it empowers me to know that I am guided by what some people would call the North Star, right? You're guided by a compass, and you know that you can get to, let's say, a destination with a much more clear understanding of what a destination is and how to get there.
I think you bring up something really important in terms of dealing with emotional trauma, and everybody has it. I always say we spend the first half of our life heaping trauma upon ourselves, and the second half of our life trying to get rid of it all. And in doing that, we learn a great deal about ourselves, and that trip is very worthwhile. But one of the things you bring up that's really important is these things take time. This doesn't turn on a dime. It can take years to process some of these things.
Yes. Now, personally, the way I see it, I see this as a lifelong journey.
Yes.
I know that what I've embarked on right now is like the layers of an onion, right? The more you peel, the more you have under. However, there's always, light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. So the deeper I go within me, the more progress I make in my life, the more I understand myself, and the more impact I can bring to myself and those around me, and eventually the world. And it starts with my world. And really, everything that we do in life, they say the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? It's pretty much the same thing with this emotional unpacking journey, right? You got to start somewhere. And as you realize that you have the power to change anything and everything about your circumstances, including your trauma, then you start to get excited about, what can I do next? What part can I heal? What can I learn? What can I accomplish?
What can I learn is my daily mantra. Seriously. And whenever I hit a bump somewhere, the first thing I think of is, okay, what can I learn? And it's always something about myself.
And I love that you mentioned that about yourself, because I did hint to this and mention it at the beginning as well, is that I used to be someone that would look externally for not just validation, but guidance, right? Like, teach me something new, tell me something more, show me something more. And, there's a lot of value in learning from others, but we hold a lot of wisdom within, because we've all had a lot of learnings in our life that perhaps we didn't necessarily take as a learning opportunity and as a teaching. And we can easily go back and say, well, wait a second, that thing happened to me. How can I reframe it so we look at it as happening for me?
Yes.
And thus there's something in it for me there that I left behind.
I think there's always a lesson. Coming at this sort of life evolution from a technology perspective, do they come together in any way?
They do, absolutely. I love that question so much. And I would say there's a couple of stages at which they come together. First of all, without technology, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today. Meaning, in 2023, let's say end of 2022, beginning of 2023, when I said, you know what, I get to do something with my why now. I understand that I get to bring more of it into the world. One of the things I did is I launched a podcast like yourself. I have a podcast called Unleash Thyself, and it's all about getting people to be inspired, to be empowered, guide and support on this journey, right? We have conversations around personal development, but also spirituality, which are two of my favorite topics, and bridging the science with spirituality. Well, how does technology come into play there? Well, without technologies such as artificial intelligence, I wouldn't be able to put out as much content as I can, because the technology helps me essentially eliminate mundane tasks so I can focus on delving deeper within myself, so I can focus on my meditation, so I can focus on the things that are important to me. If I had to spend, let's say, 5 hours a week writing show notes and timelines and whatnot for my episodes, that would take 5 hours out of my ability to do something within my zone of genius, which is essentially the zone in which I can give the most back to others and myself.
I've found the same thing. I've recently integrated AI into my workflow, and it has reduced my work burden, if you will, 60 to 70%.
Wow.
It's amazing. And so I'm really able to use that time to do other things, which is really nice. But you mentioned meditation. How did meditation come into play?
So you see, meditation was something that I thought, spiritual people did and not me. And for the longest time, I never meditated. And then when I tried to meditate, I gave myself a label of not being good enough and not knowing how to meditate, and which meant that I would give up on it fairly easily and didn't see the value. More recently, in the last year and a half or so, I understood that meditation is actually, well, it has different definitions, but for me, it's quieting down all the distractions of the world, so your devices, people around you, anything that's distracting you, and just being with yourself. So I meditate when I take my dogs out for walks because we go to nature. I meditate in the morning when I wake up and at night before I go to bed. And it's all about, again, quieting down the distractions and going deep within yourself and allowing thoughts, feelings to come up and not being judgmental and just observing. And for me, the practice has evolved significantly over the last 16 or so months, to the point where now there are less thoughts coming up in meditation. I can dig deeper, and it's allowed me to get a much better understanding of who I am, because I'll give you an example. Some feeling in my body shows up, let's say a pain. Now I can observe it and I can dive deeper into it. And there's usually a feeling associated with it, a fear, a trauma, something like that. And I'm able to essentially unpack it, which to me, of like 2 years ago, this wouldn't make sense. I was like, this doesn't make sense. How could you do that by just going internally? And that's what meditation has allowed me to do, to understand myself at a level that I wasn't able to before.
I think meditation is magic to some degree. I've been meditating for well over a decade, and I think there are several aspects to it. One is you can observe your thoughts. And when you learn to observe your thoughts, now you've created choice, conscious choice, that you didn't have before. That alone is a game changer. And I know for me, meditation opens a realm of such peace and joy, profound joy, that it's experiential. And I often liken it to eating chocolate. Okay, bear with me on this. You could read about chocolate all day long, right? But you wouldn't know what it tastes like. You wouldn't know the difference between white or dark or milk chocolate, nuts, coconut, you name the variation. But when you taste it, it's an aha moment. Same thing for meditation, because it's experiential. You experience it. And when you experience, whether it is the ability to watch your thoughts or the ability of deep peace, however you experience that meditation, you carry that with you. And I think that's the power, because over time, if you're carrying peace or joy or awareness, that's a game changer.
Oh, so well said, absolutely. And speaking of observing your thoughts, you mentioned the awareness piece. One of the frameworks I teach my clients as well is a framework that looks at where does change start. And my framework is based in organization and change management, which is something I do a lot in my corporate job, in my career. And it all starts with awareness. Like, you cannot change. You cannot do anything about something you're not aware of. So you got to be aware of everything first. And in the example you gave, if you become aware of your thoughts, that means that now you're given the choice, like you said, but the choice to do what? The choice to choose if you want to keep those thoughts and beliefs, or if you want to change them because you don't agree with them. And that's where you hold all the power. And one of the things that I talk a lot about is this idea that if you look at everything in your life, the only thing you have 100% control over is your thoughts and beliefs. But you don't have control over them unless you become aware of them. So that's the first step, like you mentioned. Then, to me, the way it goes is that I become aware of a thought. There's some level of acceptance that has to happen, right? Acknowledgement and acceptance, right? I acknowledge that this is a thought that comes up. I don't want to place any judgment on it, right? Because it's a thought. It comes up. I may not agree with it. I accept the fact that it's there. And now it's the choice piece, right? And what choice do I make? Do I make a choice to entertain the thought? And for most of us, and what I invite people to do as well, is like, think about thoughts that are repeating, or beliefs really. You likely know how that story ends. because that story has been playing for most of your life. So if you don't know like how the story ends, then it's time to change the thought and belief. And that's where you hold all the power, right? So now it's about consent beyond choice, meaning that do you give yourself permission to make the change? Because you see, that's the scariest thing to your brain, to your ego. And if you look at physiology and psychology, and if you look at how we as human beings evolved, our brain is there to protect us, nothing else. It's not there to make you happy. It's not there to make you successful. It's there to protect you. And change is the least safe thing you can do, because change means that there's a risk to you and there's a chance you might get hurt. And, if you go back 100 years plus, if you left the cave, there was a big risk. If you left the camp, there was a risk. And even if you were within those environments, there was still a big risk. So I love what you said there, because it opens up now the door to question a lot of things and start making choices that take you to better outcomes.
And to bring it full circle to what you said earlier about being still with yourself and feeling, say, pain in your body, I think a lot of our thoughts stem from trauma. A lot of our beliefs stem from trauma. So if you can stay with that trauma and unravel it, you're freeing all that energy for something much more productive.
If you may, I can give you a quick story that just happened recently that still blows my mind to this day, and I share with people. So here's how it goes, Pat. One of the things I enjoy doing is there's a Nordic spa about half an hour away from where I live. And at the Nordic spa, they have saunas and they have hot tubs, they have massage therapists, and they also have cold plunges. And I love to go and enjoy the sauna because I know the benefits that it provides to your body. I enjoy the hot tubs, and especially if it's, I'm in Canada, so it snows frequently. And if it's snowing and you're sitting in a hot tub as the snow comes down, it's beautiful, it's magical, right? But then I know that as you heat up, you should go into the cold plunge, right? So you go from 100 degrees to maybe 35, 40 degrees water, right? So it's, there's a shock to your body. And I've always been terrified of that. In fact, I'm someone that even on a summer day, I would have a hard time getting to the lake or the ocean unless the water was super warm. And I thought that was me. All my life, honestly, I was like, you know what? I don't enjoy the cold water. I'm not going to go in it, right? And if I have to go in it because my friends are, or my partner or someone else, then, I'll suck it up. I'll bring some willpower and I'll go in. So a few months ago, about 6 months ago, I made a choice. I said, you know what? I have this fear about the cold water. I need to do something with it. And my take back then was that, I need to face fear with willpower and be like, you know what? I'm going to overcome it. And what I started doing, when I was go to this spa, I would put my ankles in and the water was so cold, I would turn around and be like, I'm done. I'm good. So through willpower over, 3 months, I managed to get myself in the water and sit in for let's say 15 to 30 seconds. That's it. And of course, the entire time being super miserable, right? And then coming out and going back. But, I was proud of myself. I made progress and I was doing good. Now, what I hadn't realized in that moment is that I was approaching it from, let's call it the wrong angle for me. Because this fear that was coming up, instead of me understanding it, coming from a love perspective and be like, there's no judgment, let me see what this fear is, I was attacking it with more fear because I was coming at it like a bulldozer with willpower and being like, you know what, I don't care about the fear, I'm going to get over it and I'm going to do the thing I need to do. And what that was causing within me is, as you can imagine, a bit more trauma, a bit more anxiety, to the point that it was actually decreasing my enjoyment of the spa, which is something that I truly enjoy for my well-being and my self-care. And a month or so ago, I went there and I had a beautiful massage before I would enjoy the rest of the spa with a lady. And we got the massage therapist, it was only the second time I saw her, and we got talking about pain. And we got talking about not running away from pain, which is our default reaction as human beings. And it got me thinking, and I'm like, you know what, that's what I do. Like if something feels painful, I'll try to do anything to get out of that pain. If something feels uncomfortable, we try to do anything to get out of it. And that got me thinking. And as I, went on with my day, I was in the hot tub preparing to go to the cold plunge. I was building the courage up, and I could feel the fear rise. And the fear had a pain associated with it. And I said, you know what? Might as well use my tools. Let's use my meditation techniques. And I started meditating, and then I got curious. And I said, okay, why is this fear coming up? I was asking many questions. And I'm a fairly visual person. So what happened next, even to this day, amazes me. So as I'm in meditation in the hot tub, and I dive into the pain and the fear to try to understand it, a vision comes up for me. And the vision was of my mother when I was very young. I was an infant, and she was walking with me in her arms on a dock over a lake in Romania during springtime. And the snow just melted, and, it's in the mountains. And as she was walking, I guess the boards rotted and the dock gave way. And she fell into the cold water with me as a baby, but she was able to hold me up where only my feet were touching the water. Now, keep in mind, I'm seeing this vision in my mind's eye. And I remember a story from many years ago. My mom told me something similar, and I was like, that's interesting. And in that moment, as I got curious with that fear and the pain, I could feel the fear in my mother's aura, if you may, or in my mother's presence. Me as a baby, I didn't feel any fear, but because she felt the fear, it felt like it was transferred to me. So you talked about trauma. It felt like this was a very traumatic event for both of us. Now, that was really interesting. And I felt that, and it felt like I released it. And I got out, and this was towards the end of the day at the spa for me, and I went to the water. I managed to get in. I stayed, 45 seconds, and that fear wasn't there. And the entire time, my brain couldn't comprehend. So I didn't do much with it. I left, I went home, and then a few weeks later, I talked to my mother, and I say, hey, can you remind me about the story? Because this happened. And she reminded me about the story, and she confirmed that, I never actually got submerged in the water. Only my feet touched the water, but she was terrified because she went all the way under before coming back up. And it was cold. You can imagine it was very, very cold at the time. And that instance, when she was about 25 years old, when this happened, scarred her for life, to the point that she cannot go near water or on a boat or anything like that without having immense fear. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, long story short, this past weekend, I'm at the spa again, a month later. And I said, you know what? I'm curious what happens now. I was actually excited to try to go in the cold water because I haven't had a chance to test it. Now, don't you think, Pat, that by the end of it, I had sat in there 3 minutes and then 5 minutes on the last one, to the point that I was not even feeling the cold. I had the biggest grin on my face, and I'm like, I have no idea how this is working. I never in my life thought I was going to be in the cold water. That's like 35 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 degrees Fahrenheit at best, on a day that's like 30 degrees outside, while everyone else is rushing through the water when they come or turning around. And I'm like, I have no idea how this works. All it took was for me to get curious, dive into the fear, follow the rabbit hole, feel it, and then release it. You're muted, by the way.
Thank you. That's the thing. If you go down that rabbit hole and you dive into the fear, it's as if you can package it up and decide you're going to just let it go. And when that happens, you have space for new energy. And it can be very exhilarating.
Oh my. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm so excited, a few days later. And in the moment, I could not believe it. Like when I did 10 minutes, I was like, I mean, my record before was like, 45 seconds at best. And that was like pulling teeth, right? Like I was forcing myself. The 3 minutes, I was like, I can go longer. But I got out, and then I was like, wait a second, if I can do that, what else can I do? So I went back for 5 minutes, and I could have gone longer. And that's the power of going in as opposed to external for answers. Go inwards, get curious, ask questions. And it all starts with those thoughts you mentioned as well, right? With becoming aware of that. And as you become aware of it, you can ask questions and you can dive deeper. I'm so excited because I've developed so many tools and I've practiced so many different things. And now as something comes up, I get excited to be like, okay, let's actually delve into it and see see what comes up.
Part of this conversation is about change, and people so hate change. I personally find change generally kind of fun. I have a strange sense of adventure, perhaps, but but how do you get people out of that comfort zone to start to accept that change can be their friend?
Oh, I love the question, Pat. So here's what I would say to that. Now, before I even realized that everything starts with us. So if we want something to change in our life, it starts within, not external. I was someone that always thought that if I didn't like something about my partner, about my situation, it had to be external that I find the change, right? I have to get someone else to change. And that came, I guess, from my background, but also how society actually is in general. And in my professional life, I've been an organizational change management expert for a decade plus. And usually in an organization, change happens from an outside source, and then you have, as a person, as an employee, you have to implement the change, right? So it always feels like it's external. So perhaps this skewed my opinion initially, but then I realized, wait a second, if I don't like something, that allows me an opportunity to change. Now, it is scary because our brain, like I mentioned earlier, through evolution, has evolved to keep us safe. And change is not safe, meaning that any type of change has an inherent risk of hurting you, right? And your brain wants to keep you alive. So to me, what helped the most is understanding, first of all, where we start as human beings, right? We all start with this bias against change, right? Like a bias to avoid change at all costs. And there's another reason that people don't think about very often, but science shows us, which is energy conservation. So whenever you embark on a change, you have to consume energy. And again, our body is such a beautiful machine that it's all about conserving energy. So you combine the fact that change can be scary and can be unsafe with the fact that you are in a state that you always need to conserve energy. And now you're fighting against something that's built within you to enact change. Now, that's what we work against. But now, because we're aware of our thoughts and our beliefs, and we are aware of the science and how the body works, we now have a choice. We know from past experiences that change sometimes brought good things, and we can dive into that and say, well, wait a second. If I want something in my life, let's say my vision is to be a public speaker, well, it requires change for me to get there. So it's about building excitement and ideally having a framework of your own that works for you to get you to the destination. But it starts with what I would call an action step. And my entire framework that I mentioned earlier is called the action framework. How do we get ourselves to a spot where we're happy to take action towards our desired future state without causing trauma and anxiousness and overwhelm and stress and procrastination and all these fears that normally come up?
And I would argue that to move ahead in that manner, you need to take baby steps. And ideally, you need to be incredibly present, because when you're present, the experiences of the past and the fear of the future don't exist.
And I love that point because, again, looking at science, they're proving this right now, where essentially your brain, your subconscious mind, if you want, and even your conscious mind, it doesn't know the difference between good or bad. It doesn't know the difference between yes and no. And also, it doesn't work in the past or the future. It works in the present moment. The past and the future are things that we are making up with all the information that we have. So if that's the case, that means that, to your point, right, if you can keep yourself in the present moment and understand that everything that happened in the past is an opportunity to learn, and everything in the future is an opportunity for you to work towards, then it empowers you to be able to take control of your life. And that's really at the bottom of this. Like, my biggest transformation piece of my life, I would say, is the realization that we are all creators. Meaning that you can create the life you want, because after all, the life you have right now was of your creation to begin with. Like, you're in the situation you're in right now, good, bad, anything in between, because of actions you took. And those actions were influenced by your emotions and your feelings, and those emotions and feelings were influenced by your thoughts and beliefs, and those were influenced by your environment. And that's how I look at this, right? But my environment, I cannot influence very much. I cannot change. Now, there are certain aspects I have control over, like the people I hang out with, but for the most part, I can't control what people do or other people or other situations do. But then the one piece I do have control over is the thoughts and beliefs. And that's why I keep going back to that, because that's where you hold the power. And if your thought is that change is scary, well, that's an opportunity for you to change that thought or that belief, because it could be a belief, really, if that's what you've been told all your life.
I think a lot of people just get so beaten up by life that they don't want to stick their head outside the foxhole. And that keeps them in a static situation, which ultimately will collapse, because you can have incremental change or you can have dramatic change. Incremental change is a lot easier to handle. If you're really out of touch with what's going on around you because you refuse to change, something will give. And that's a tough road to take.
Yes. And I love what you said about the incremental change. And I'll say that I both agree and disagree, and I'll explain why. Incremental change is how we start on this journey. There are small steps we take, we start seeing benefits, and then we build more excitement, more courage to continue on. But there are certain things we can do in our life that can actually propel us to see exponential changes happening into our life. And one of those areas for me was the rewiring of the brain approach through neuroscience, neuropsychology, which is what I specialize in these days, is because when you can start rewiring your brain and you can start reframing certain beliefs and certain thoughts, the effects are actually much, much bigger than we ever thought possible. Because if you look at what the example I just gave with the sauna and the cold plunge, I mean, that change was literally from one session to another. It started with baby steps because I was trying to push my way with willpower. But when I approached it differently, I found a different method to approach it. The change was very, very quick, was very rapid, and the effects were significant. And that's what happens in life too, right? Sometimes we don't have the right tools or the right approach, and we have to take baby steps because we're fighting against the current. But sometimes we get the right mentor or we get the right approach, and we're able to make much bigger progress because we're going with the tide instead of going against it.
If you could leave people with 3 pieces of advice on facing change, what would you say to them?
I love the question, Pat. Okay, let me think there for a second. So 3 pieces of advice. The number one I would say is that, and this is what really got me to get out of my own way, in a way, and get out of my own depression, was realizing that no one will come to save me and take me to my vision. Not because people don't want the best for you, not because people are not great, but because you're usually in the way, meaning that people wanted to help me. People wanted to pull me out of my depression, to help me get to the other side. I wasn't accepting it. So realizing that you and you alone hold the power to a better future, whatever better means to you, that's the first step. So that's kind of goes back to what you said, Pat, which is that awareness. Become aware of your situation. Become aware of the thoughts and beliefs that keep you small. Because we're all amazing beings. We're all creators. We can all do anything and everything that we want. It just needs to start with becoming aware of the situation first. So I say that's the number one. The second one that's really big for me to have been transformational is the idea that when something happens in life, at least the old way I was seeing it, and I see this across many people in my life, it doesn't matter how successful they are, is this idea that things happen to us. Someone cut me off in traffic. Someone ran into me. Someone did this to me. Someone yelled at me. Those are things that happen to us. And when they happen to us, we are the victim and they are the victimizer. And we generally don't look at the potential lessons hidden in there. And we tend to focus on the negatives mostly. Now, what I've come to realize is that if we reframe that from happening to us to happening for us, all of a sudden the power comes back in your hands. So right now, when I go in any situation, regardless of how negative or positive it is according to my own definitions, I always ask the question, how is this happening for me? I have a fight with my partner. I know I had a role to play in it. Then I go reflect on it and okay, you know what? How did this happen for me? And it's magical to see what comes up. Because if you don't ask this question, you almost always go to the negative side. And for those listening, one thing you can do with this is take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle. On the left, put how something is happening to you. On the right, put how something is happening for you. And start to fill out the two columns and see what comes up for you. So the third piece of advice that goes with this then, Pat, is to then make a conscious choice to be like, okay, what do you want to put your focus on? We know from science, and this has been proven many times, and there's many studies someone can look up if they want. If, let's say, Pat, I tell you, don't think of an elephant, you'll start thinking about an elephant. If we talk about a red car, right, and you now go on the street, you're going to see red cars. And there's a psychological and physiological reason for that, because you have so much information that your subconscious mind absorbs, pretty much everything, that whatever your conscious mind tells it needs to focus on something. So if I say red car, well, I mean, yeah, it can show me all the cars, but it's going to put focus on something. So what you focus on is what's going to show up in your life. So in those two columns that we did, happening to you, happening for you, do you focus on how it happened to you? So then all the negatives, or do you focus on how it happened for you, all the positives? And when you start looking at the positives more than the negatives, you're going to start to see more of those in your life. And it's not about ignoring the negatives because they happen, but the negatives are there to teach you a lesson. Glean the lesson, don't give them too much energy and too much focus, and focus on the positives. If you do any of these three things I mentioned, you will see rapid changes in your life.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.